Hi everybody, my name is Jeremy, this is Red Beans Recording, and I want to teach you how to use VCV Rack. And by extension, I want to teach you how modular synthesis works, how Eurorack modular synthesis works. VCV Rack is awesome. I slept on it for a really long time, picked it up last year, and started using it extensively in my lessons with people to demonstrate, one, how VCV Rack works, but two, all kinds of modular concepts, just like all kinds of stuff, because everything you need to understand and have fun with modular and Eurorack exists in VCV Rack. It's an amazing resource. It's free. I'm using the pro version, but the free version is just great. It's perfect. It's awesome. And if you're at all interested in modular synthesis, you should get it and start playing around. So the whole point of this video series, which is going to be like 4 or 5 videos, is just to get comfortable with the basic building blocks, the terms of all this stuff, how it works, how like you can start just playing around. Basically a good foundation so that you can understand how VCV Rack works, how modular works, and start having fun with it. In this first video, we're going to go over like the very basics, like what voltage is, what an oscillator is, pitch, gate, envelopes, and VCAs, filter, LFO, and that kind of stuff. And then we'll move on to sequencing, clocks, gates, modulation, and finally we'll put it all together in a cool semi-generative patch near the end. So that's the plan for these 4 videos. If you are a very beginner with VCV Rack, I welcome you. If you're a very beginner with Eurorack, I welcome you. If you're an intermediate or advanced user, this might not be for you, but hey, you can stick around and hang out. We're just going to have some fun. All right? Boo, boo-doo-doo, boo, 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 boo. So if you want to follow along, you'll want to get VCV Rack and then open it up. I have cleared my default patch. The template patch looks different, but I have saved a template patch that is a blank patch because I don't need all the stuff that's in there. However, we are going to need some things to get started. I will be using primarily all the stuff that comes with VCV Rack. Any of the extra library stuff that I have put in here is free. So let me show you what I have real quick. I have this stuff. So if you want to take a look at this real quick, just sort of like pause the video and go subscribe to these modules in the VCV Rack library, which you can do by going to browse VCV Rack library, and you search for like one of the makers that you might see in my thing here. So let's search for Bufaco, and then you would hit Bufaco and you would hit subscribe over here. Once you've done that for all of the ones that you saw in here, these ones right here, come on back, unpause the video, and we'll get started. I'm not going to be using all of this stuff, but these are the sort of like core functionality ones that I've gotten that I really, really like, and they're all free, so pretty dope. So I'm going to right click and add a few things. We're going to need a MIDI in. So I'm going to search for MIDI, and I'm going to add the MIDI to CV thing right here. Boop. We also need an audio out, so I'm going to right click and search for audio. And I'm going to grab the audio 8. So this is MIDI in and audio out. I'm going to change my audio driver here to the thing that I am currently using. Choose my sample rate, all that good stuff. And I'm going to go over here and choose my MIDI controller in. You can also choose your computer keyboard if you want, or a gamepad, which is pretty fun. So what this means, though, is that when I press a key on my MIDI keyboard, I'll be sending note data into VCV Rack, which will help us understand how things work. And this over here will give us an audio out to, be able to hear things. So let's talk about the super basic things that we all take for granted when it comes to synthesizers that you cannot take for granted in VCV Rack and Eurorack. The first is just building a basic subtractive synth voice, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the default patch that loads up by default in VCV Rack is a semi-complicated sort of subtractive synthesizer patch, especially in V1 of VCV Rack. It was a really basic patch that showed off how a subtractive synth voice would work. So we're going to reproduce that. I know it's not really exciting, but it's super important to understand what's going on here. Like what are we having to attach to things to make them do the normal things that we associate with synthesizer voices? To build up a subtractive synthesizer voice, we need a VCO, or voltage controlled oscillator. We're going to use the default VCV Rack one. We also need a VCA. We're going to use this little one right here. And you can go ahead and pause this once we're done and add these if you want, if you're following along. We're also going to need something to generate an envelope for us. So we're going to use the ADSR right here, attack decay sustained release. This is an envelope generator. And don't worry, we're going to explain all this stuff in great detail. What else do we need? Let's get a filter. Let's get this VCF, voltage controlled filter. Again, these are all standard parts of a subtractive synthesis voice, and these are all standard parts of VCV Rack. I'm also going to grab a scope. I love the scopes in VCV Rack. So I'm going to search for scope in my library, and I'm actually going to add 2 of these. I'm going to hit Control D and duplicate my scopes. And that's because these are just so awesome, so useful to see stuff going on. And let's see, what else do I want? I realize that my Audio 8 out here doesn't have any form of attenuation for the volume, so it might get a little loud. So I'm going to go ahead and add an attenuverter in here. Actually, we'll just duplicate the VCA. We'll just have another VCA. It's a little dumb, and normally I'd use a mixer here, but this will give us a chance to talk about VCAs as well. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and start understanding what's happening here. This VCO, voltage controlled oscillator, let's take a sine wave out of it and put it into this VCA thing right here, and take this out and put it into our audio output. And we'll go ahead and molt that, basically, duplicate that so that it is to 1 and 2, so now we hear it stereo. So you may notice right now that this thing is just going, just going along, and that's because this is a continuous oscillator. In an analog oscillator, you have a circuit that's just constantly making a waveform, whether or not that's sine, triangle, saw, or square. And it's going to just keep on going. And that's where the subtractive aspect of subtractive synthesis comes from, is where you need to subtract some stuff from this to get it to work like a normal synthesizer voice. So, first of all, let's talk about pitch. We'll get to that other stuff in a second. The pitch standard in Eurorack is called volt per octave, and all Eurorack operates with voltage, and we're going to be talking about this as if it was Eurorack, like as if, you know, this was a physical Eurorack, because it's not going to make any sense if we try to abstract this in any way. I want you to like fully understand that what we're doing here is completely analogous to how it would work in a Eurorack system for the most part. So within the Eurorack standard, we have a range of voltage that's available to us. So within Eurorack, we have a range of voltage to play with. I believe the full range is 10 volts. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that can be -5 to 5. It can be 0 to 10. It could be 0 to 8. It could be 0 to 1. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of standardization when it comes to what control voltage will do what to what. And the only standard I can really think of is the pitch standard, which is 1 volt per octave. Look at that little friend. Okay, so when you see volt per octave, or voct, that is a volt per octave input or a pitch input. And same thing with a volt per octave output. So if I want to make this voltage controlled oscillator do normal pitches, I can grab this volt per octave output of my MIDI CV and stick it into here. So now let's turn this up a little bit, and I'm going to play on my keyboard. Beautiful, right? Let's go ahead and take this by holding Control or Command, I guess if you're on a Mac, and put it into our scope. And let's see what's happening over here. I'm going to turn the time down for this scope. Now, watch what's happening with the scope. That little squiggly line we saw on the scope is what's making our voltage-controlled oscillator make pitches. If I was to add something like an LFO, which is a low-frequency oscillator, and we will get to this in a second, this is something that's going to put out a sine wave or another shape at a particular rate. If I took that and I put it into the volt per octave input of our VCO, like so, we would hear something different. Not really musical, is it? But still kind of cool. And actually, this is really fun to play around with through a quantizer, which we'll talk about in a bit. Let's go ahead and get rid of this LFO for right now. Okay, so we've determined we can make a pitch, but we still have an issue. This sound is just chugging along. It does not stop. It has no shape to it. We can't make it stop making a sound. So this is where the subtractive part of subtractive synthesis comes from. The first thing we want to subtract from this is some form of volume information. We want to shape it with an envelope, which is something that you're probably pretty used to when you look at a hardware synthesizer or a software synthesizer. There's usually an amplitude envelope. So the VCA is what we're going to use for that. The voltage-controlled amplifier is what we're going to pass our sine wave through, our oscillator through, and then we're going to use the envelope to shape it. So let's get that set up. I'm going to take it out of our VCA over here that we're just basically using for volume. You can see that I can turn this up or down right here, the level. And I'm going to put it into this one right here, which is the one we're going to use our envelope on to shape its volume. So let's get our sine wave, put it into the in of this VCA, and take the out, we'll put it into our mixed VCA over here. Now, you'll immediately notice that we're back where we started, right? Everything is back where we started. So how can I shape this VCA's volume? See how I can do this? I want something to do this for me. So we could actually grab that LFO we had before and put the sine wave into the CV, and we'll see that it does that. So this CV input right here of our VCA is what we need to put the signal in, the control voltage in, that we want to use to shape our volume. So we can use this envelope. So let's do that. Let's take the envelope out and put it into that CV input of our VCA. Okay, well that's weird. Nothing's happening. This is like completely quiet, and if I turn the level all up, it's still not doing anything. Well, that's because this ADSR has to be told to do its job. On a traditional synthesizer, when you press a note, a whole bunch of stuff is happening in the background. One, the synthesizer is being told to play a particular pitch. And two, this thing called a note on event is being sent to your amplitude envelope. And that amplitude envelope is then shaping the volume of your sound as you press the key. So we need to put that note on event into place here so that our envelope will do its thing. And to do that, we're going to use something called a gate. So over here on our MIDI to CV, you can see gate. And over here on our envelope, you can see gate. Let's go ahead and put that together. All right. I'm also going to molt this gate out over to our second scope, and I'm going to molt our envelope out to our second scope so you can see what this looks like when we press a key down. All right, here we go. All right, so what do you see on that scope? Well, remember we put the gate into the in1, which is that yellow signal right there, and we put the envelope that's being generated into in2. So what you're seeing is the gate signal and the envelope signal that the envelope generator is creating. A gate is a quick jump from 0 volts to 5 volts, or 0 volts to the maximum, and it will stay high until you release the key or the gate is told to stop. This is different than a trigger, which just goes like this. Boop. It's just a tiny little pulse. And the reason that gates are useful, one of the reasons, at least in this case, is because look at our envelope right now. Look at where it is in its stage. You can see that it's in the sustain stage, right? Right here. How would the envelope know to be in this stage and hold here if it weren't for the high of the gate, the maintaining of the high voltage of the gate? That's what's happening here. Gates are useful because they can stay high, and therefore things that have a sustained stage, amongst other things, will stay going. There's lots of uses for gates. We'll get into some of them later, but this is the basic understanding of it. This gate will stay high, and in this case, tell the sustain to hang out at whatever level we choose until we let go. The rest of this is acting like, just like an envelope. We have an attack stage, which is the onset. It can go very long. Our decay stage is what happens after the attack stage is done. You'll see that over here. Attack finishes, and we sweep down the decay. And now we're at the sustain stage. And you can see that here. There's a lot of great visual information in VCV Rack's controls here and modules to see what's happening. So there's sustain, and then when we let go, we hit the release section, and this could be like super long if we wanted it to. There is the absolute basics of a subtractive synthesizer voice. We have a continuous oscillator, a voltage-controlled oscillator that gets pitched through the 1 volt per octave standard. We use a voltage-controlled amplifier next, which takes that signal and can make it quiet or loud depending on control voltage that goes into it. And then we are using a gate, a note on event with sustain, to create an envelope control voltage that goes into the VCA to tell it to shape the volume of that thing. Let's get this filter involved. So I don't have a particular opinion as to whether or not I want to run my VCA first or my VCF first, my voltage controlled amplifier and my voltage controlled filter. If you have like opinions on that, let me know. I've never really cared. So in this case, I'm just going to run out of our VCA. I'm going to take this out right here and I'm going to run it into the filter. And then I'm going to take the LPF out of the filter and put it back into here. Now, what is this? Well, these are the two filter types that this puts out. A low pass filter is something that lets the lows pass through as the cutoff goes down. And the high pass filter is something that lets the highs pass as you go like this. So one rolls off lows and one rolls off highs. We might also want to change our sound, our waveform coming out of the VCO, because sine waves aren't going to like have anything for a filter to grab onto. So we're going to take this from sine and put it into saw like this. Now, if I turn this filter up, we'll hear a bit more of a brash saw sort of sound, right? Now, let's listen to the filter. Maybe put a little resonance on it. One of the things that we would do in a normal synthesizer is have an envelope control the cutoff frequency. This is very, very common, and a lot of the times you have a dedicated envelope for the cutoff and also one for the volume. That's usually how it works, but not always. So in this case, I want to show you sort of the economy version of that, and that is to use the same envelope that we're using for our volume for our filter. We can molt for days in this, meaning we can multiply signals very, very easily by holding down either control or command, depending on what you're on, and making a new cable from our source and putting it in our destination. So now we get to talk about modulation a little bit. If I turn this down, we're still not hearing what we would expect. We should hear this shape working on our filter, but we're not. And that's because of these little friends right here. These three little knobs here I would call attenuverters. And what these do when they are present in like an input like this is they say how much the modulation or control voltage coming in will affect the control that they're supposed to modulate. So you can see that this says cutoff right here, or cut. That's our cutoff right here. Right now we're at 0. We're completely at noon. This would be negative and this would be positive. So what we need to do is crank this up to an amount that we desire. This is basically the control like when you are on a regular synthesizer where it says like filter envelope depth. That's what this is right here. So I'm going to turn that all the way up. Now I can hear a tiny little bit of shaping, which is a little odd considering our cutoff frequency is all the way up. But to really get this going, we need to turn this down like here. There we go. Modulation can come in a lot of different formats. The kind of modulation that we're getting right here, as you can see from the scope, is what I would call unipolar modulation, and it's positive. So this is a zero crossing on our scope right here. When you go up from that, you're going positively, and you're going in one direction, one pole, therefore it's unipolar and it's positive. That means you got to think about where this knob is right here. And you're looking at it like, all right, it's at 34.449. That's its default state. That's where it starts. And that's where it will return to once the modulation has finished messing with it. In the same way that our VCA over here defaults to 0 when a CV signal is plugged into it, and then goes up depending on what kind of CV it gets. So the relationship of the depth knob here, this little attenuverter, and where your original knob is how you decide how this modulation will work. So now we have a subtractive synthesizer voice. We have our VCO going into our VCA, going into our VCF. And by the way, if you've ever heard of these terms and you're like, why are they called voltage controlled or whatever? Well, it's because it all came from this stuff, you know, even before modular Eurorack, stuff like that. I mean, we had analog synthesizers and they were all controlled by voltage. That's how they worked. So maybe this is opening some doors in your little brain about how the terminology has been always this way. And you're like, oh, okay, well, now I understand why. All right, so we've built ourselves a little voice here. I promised I'd talk about LFOs as well. So I'm going to go into our library here, and I'm going to search for LFO, and hey, look at that. And I'm actually going to add a second scope, which I can do by hovering over here. Maybe click on this and hitting Control D, duplicate. I'm sure you can right-click and get the same thing. Duplicate, yeah. And you can even duplicate with cables, which is really, really useful. Okay, so what's an LFO? Well, there's different frequencies that things can oscillate at. So let's go ahead and get that sine wave we had earlier from our VCO here. And let's also grab the sine wave from our LFO. Depending on our time, you will see that if we go really, really close, you'll see there's our sine wave right there. That's our super fast sine wave. That's from our voltage controlled oscillator over here. And this blue one, that's a lot longer, is our low frequency oscillator. This VCO is operating at what we would call audio rate. It is somewhere between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, which is the range of human hearing. That's what we call audio rate. And then this LFO is somewhere below that, though this can go up to very fast, like 1024 hertz, like super, super fast. So you can see we can get into audio rate with this, like starting from around here. We're at 20 hertz, and then everything above that is audio rate. So if I was to, for instance, take this might sound a little ugly. So that's actually our LFO. So LFOs, VCOs, they are sometimes interchangeable in a fun way. And that's something to keep in mind with modular, because there aren't really a lot of rules when it comes to what you modulate things with. Like, it's really, really fun to use audio rate modulation, and maybe I'll show you that in a smidge. So what are LFOs usually used for? Well, they're kind of like invisible hands. They're like things that will push things around for you. This blue line we're seeing is a control voltage signal that can be used to modulate things. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to take this output here and put it into our cutoff frequency. All right, you ready? You can hear and see that when that goes high, our cutoff frequency is high. And when it's low, our cutoff frequency is low. And again, you can see our zero crossing here. That means that this is currently unipolar. I do believe there is a way. Yep, if you hit the offset button here, now it's become bipolar. So what's bipolar? Well, it means that now the modulation is going to move this knob invisibly to the left and to the right, the amount that you choose. Does that make sense? I hope so. There are different flavors of wave shapes we can use here. In fact, LFOs can get really, really cool and complicated. So let me take the triangle out, and you can see now we have sort of a sharper up and down. We have saw, which sounds like this. And square, which is basically up and down. And there's a special property to square in that if you look at, let me turn down, I want to get rid of this real quick. Here. Okay. See this shape that this thing is putting out here? Looks pretty similar to what we have up here, right? This gate signal. That's something that you should keep in mind because it's going to come up later. And in fact, if I was to take this square out and put it into the gate here of our envelope, what we would get would be something triggering our envelope for us. Let's go ahead and get this. All right. So why is this cool? Well, watch what happens when I turn up the frequency. Pulse width changes the actual width of that gate, which means that our sustain stage will get shorter. Or longer. So, why is this cool? Well, it means that LFOs can work as what I would call an analog clock or an analog gate signal or an analog trigger signal. We'll get into that in the second video, but it's kind of wanted to wet your whistle a little bit there. All right, so to finish this off, I think what I would like to do is I'm going to add the plateau reverb. right here. This is a great reverb. We'll be revisiting it a lot. I just kind of wanted to leave you with, like we can use an effect on this and make it sound a little less dry, a little less kind of ugly. Let's take the VCA out here and put it into the left right of our plateau. And then we'll take the left out and right out of the plateau and put it into our audio interface here. Now we should get a wonderful reverb on this. So thank you for watching this basic intro to the basics of Eurorack, the basics of some of the language, some of the things we'll need to do just to get some sounds going on. And I hope it was helpful for you. In the second video in this series, we'll move on to clocks and sequencing, because right now all we're doing here is playing this, and obviously we want something to play this for us. So that's going to be really, really fun. I'm excited to see you there, and thanks for watching. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Beans Recording. Oh, God. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Beans Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.